Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Lovers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You may also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, European Quarterly Magazine, and also the architect of the SCM IT Supermap. And we will have a nice, interesting live webinar coming up this hour. We're going to discuss scenario modeling, digital twins, and we have an exciting panel of experts with me. And we talk about, as I said, digital twins. We also show some short demo, and we have an interactive discussion. All right. So next to me, you see me here on the left. In the middle, Anand Pandey. Welcome.
Thanks, Martijn. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
So Anand has a background among other companies in energy sector, and the same as Paul from Europe. Welcome. You have also a background in the oil and energy business in South Africa. So Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Martin, and hi, everybody. Thrilled to be with you today.
All right. A few details, household details. So this webinar will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available afterwards within 48 hours. So the audience is on mute, but feel free to ask questions. So you see on the right-hand side, you see the chat functionality, but next to that on the right, you see also the Q&A functionality. So feel free to ask questions about anything you want to discuss in this matter. If these questions are in line of the discussion we're having, I will ask this question right away. There will be a Q&A at the end of the webinar, close to the hour. So you can also ask these questions at the end. And if you are still in need of some answers, we will be in the lounge at 5 o'clock CET. So afterwards, we have an extra 30 minutes to discuss further topics about supply chain, digital twins, and scenario planning. So you can join us afterwards. Feel free, and we will be sitting at table 1. So click on a chair, and a Zoom meeting will be opening up, and then Paul and myself will be there. So there is also an opportunity afterwards to discuss things further. All right. Talk about IT Supermap. I mentioned we are busy of updating this IT Supermap. You might have seen it. There are all kind of supply chain software types, ERP, WMS, and TMS. And AIMMS is also on it, and with a background in scenario planning, network design, but also moving in different areas like sales and operations planning. So AIMMS will be there, and they will be expanding the footprint because their tooling has been expanded in the last years. So we'll talk about it. So this is where you can find AIMMS, and then you find the stuff we are publishing at Supply Chain Media. But next, Paul, maybe you can tell something a bit more as an introduction about AIMMS.
Yeah, sure, Martin. So AIMMS has been in business for more than 30 years now, founded in 1989, and this was founded by a Dutch professor of mathematics. But of course, since then, in the last 30 plus years, we've grown a lot and have offices in the US, in Seattle, and in Singapore. And over that time, become basically a global standard for optimization modeling. So AIMMS's DNA is basically around optimization modeling. And we service that both to industry, but also to the academic community.
Yes, and then you started out in the operations research background with algorithms, but in the last years you have also created application apps, so self-serving models. So you have moved away, or you have evolved from the complex operation research models into intuitive applications.
That's quite correct. Yeah. So we saw a need for that in the market, and we now build what we call out-of-the-box supply chain applications. And these are generic applications built using the same technology, the same model development technology, but built as generic applications that we publish and service to a wide variety of customers. So many customers using one app instead of one app built specifically for one customer.
Yeah, and here you see all kind of household names, on the manufacturing and wholesale and retail environment on the left, but also on the consulting side. Maybe you can explain a bit more about the kind of companies you are serving.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, the need for optimization modeling and scenario modeling crosses just about all verticals. So manufacturing is there, retail, consumer goods, energy distribution, So really no limit to which vertical of company uses our technology, and also no limit to the geography. So from Europe to the US to Latin America and Asia Pacific. So it's interesting that a lot of companies have got their own centers of excellence where they build and run these models. But we also work extensively with a partner network. So if you're building a bespoke application and you need specialized skill, we've got a very wide partner network that can help with that. But even with the out-of-the-box applications, we've got a partner network that delivers the professional services around the technology.
Yeah, and maybe 10, 20 years ago, it was like the BCGs and the AT Kearneys of this world, now Kearney, using your kind of tools for supply chain network design and optimization. Whereas in the last decade, I would say the manufacturing companies and the wholesale and retail companies are using this kind of tools themselves.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend that we've seen. So from it being a very specialized skill that you had to outsource, companies are seeing more and more the need to have this in-house and this capability in-house, and are insourcing it and setting up their own centers of technology, centers of excellence. And that's shifted again with the out-of-the-box applications as well. So the network design application, for example, was previously also the domain of consultants, but we see a lot of companies establishing their own capability in their supply chain departments to enable this scenario modeling on a continuous basis.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell me a bit more about analytics and the positioning of AIMMS. That might be of interest, and then we are moving into the area of scenario planning more and more.
Yeah, I'd like to do that, and I want to try and build a bridge with the topic of the webinar, which is using scenario modeling to weather the next crisis. So if you talk about scenario modeling, what does that mean? It essentially means that you're using analytics technology to model futures that don't exist yet. So if you talk about analytics, if you talk about scenario modeling, you're basically talking about using analytics technology to do that. And I think the important point with this slide, there's different layers of analytics. So it's a Gartner slide, might be familiar to some people, but the top two layers look at the past, whereas the third layer, the predictive layer, looks at, all right, what's going to happen. So typically in supply chain, that's your demand forecast. And then the prescriptive is the so what question, right? So what should I do about it? If I expect this future to happen, what's the best thing to do about that? And that's very much the sweet spot where AIMMS plays in, and that's the technology that supports the scenario modeling that we talk about.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, I was wondering, when you took at the mid layer, the predictive layer, that's forecasting, and a lot of the times it's statistical forecasting, so pattern recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are moving down below, you are moving in the area of artificial intelligence and machine learning to learn from data and to deal with it, because then we have more and more data, and then you can have different kind of scenarios and then learn from all kind of scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned artificial intelligence. So Gartner also talks about artificial intelligence as different things, but there's the machine learning aspect, which is also very commonly used in demand forecasting. Mm-hmm. But there's also the mathematical optimization aspect of that. So the prescriptive part. So two different areas of artificial intelligence in there. And both of them complementing each other and used for different purposes and complementing each other very nicely.
Yeah. All right. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about optimization, the core of your business. Maybe you can see where's the value in it.
Yeah. So optimization. So we said on the previous slide, we use the terms prescriptive analytics and optimization as kind of the same thing. So just to touch back again on the topic of scenario modeling, mm-hmm. You're doing scenario modeling, and that's using prescriptive analytics technology. And at the core of that is an optimization, which is effectively a mathematical algorithm to give you that recommended action. So I won't go into a lot of detail, but essentially what happens with the optimizations, with the mathematics in the back end, is that you've got an objective function. So think about minimizing cost or minimizing carbon or optimizing service levels. You've got a number of decisions. So you've got those are typically the variables in your mathematical model. So that's how much do I make, how much do I move, how much do I pass through each DC. And then you've got a lot of data. So there's things that you know the transport rates, you know the location of your facilities, etc. But there's also constraints. So certain facilities can handle certain products, and certain suppliers can supply certain products. So those 4 dimensions are the dimensions of the mathematical problem. And the optimization technology, you've got solvers, so mathematical solvers, where you throw all of this complexity at the solver, and it comes back with an optimum based on that objective function. So you could say, tell me which customers I service from which DC. That's the decision. Given the fact that I know where those customers are and the cost of transporting to them, with a constraint that I can only handle so much product at a DC. Now tell me what's the minimum cost solution for that. And that's the essence of running these scenarios. You're throwing this complexity and these questions at it, but you're getting back an answer that says this is the best way to meet this possible future that you're exploring with your scenario.
Okay, I was wondering, looking at data, so there's a lot of data, but what kind of data do you need? What kind of level of data, SKU level or more higher level data? What do you need for this kind of scenario planning?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. So it depends which level you're doing the scenarios at. So if you're looking at strategic/tactical, you've actually got the luxury that you can use aggregated and slightly less accurate data. So for example, if you're looking at global flows of food products, you can group that into product categories, and to just understand where the flows are. Whereas if you're running scenarios at a very detailed aggregate level, you need to know on the SKU level and per truck and per hour almost. So the nice thing about strategic and tactical optimization or scenario modeling is that you can afford to take some shortcuts and make some assumptions and aggregate your data to get the bigger picture and not get lost in the detail, but get the bigger picture pretty quickly and easily.
I got an interesting question coming up from the audience. What are the biggest and most common mistakes made when it comes to scenario modeling?
Well, it's a good question. So I think the first mistake would probably be to not understand what you're trying to achieve when you start. So a lot of people with the technology, first temptation is just to gather any data you've got and throw it at the tool and hope that it gives you some kind of insight. So I think you need to be pretty clear on what you want to achieve. And that solves a lot of problems later on, because if you say, well, actually, I want to create this digital twin of my supply chain at the strategic level, then I understand the limitations. I understand it's not reading things from machines on a minute-by-minute basis, but it's enabling me to say, well, is my DC in the right place? What happens if this DC gets knocked out by a hurricane? What happens if this transport lane gets blocked by a ship in the Suez? So I think it's a little bit about knowing what you want to answer before you start with constructing the model and gathering the data.
All right. Yeah, Anand, maybe you can tell me, relating to this, what is the need for this kind of scenario modeling?
Yeah, so I think the overarching struggle that we all face nowadays is that the world is rapidly changing, and there are more and more uncertainties surrounding and affecting supply chains. I think we all know this, but this map developed by Gartner does a very good job of showing the extent and the need behind scenario modeling nowadays, if you will. So, for example, Brexit had an immediate impact on trade and tariffs. You had tighter immigration rules, compounded to labor shortages in the UK, which clearly has an impact globally as well. You had multiple earthquakes and floods that required facilities to close down. Another very common disruption nowadays, in fact, is around ransomware or cyber attacks that impacted computer equipments, for instance, in the Colonial Pipeline in the US, as you see on the left-hand side of the map. And if you want the most recent one, the Ukraine war, has many vulnerabilities attached to it. One, for instance, is the over-reliance that Europe has on natural gas and crude oil from Russia, as well as a dependence on both Russia and Ukraine for agricultural commodities. So this creates an accelerated need for visibility And it creates an accelerated need for scenario modeling, because you have to try to put yourself in a position where you are proactively preparing yourself for these types of uncertainties, and then reactively make decisions when the uncertainty does arise.
Yeah. So there's more and more talks about black swans. Some people say, you know, we could expect a war in the Ukraine, sadly enough, but you have to create some mental contingencies and also some plans what to do.
Yeah, look, it's always tough to actually predict an uncertainty from that might happen. Of course, if we were able to predict everything, then there would be no need for such scenario modeling. So I don't think it's as much about specifically thinking of exact events that might happen, but rather blockages or changes in your supply chain that could occur and seeing what implications they have. For instance, we would not know that the Suez Canal would be blocked for a few days. That's a very surprising event that happened. But what we could have studied is, in case one of our transportation routes or lanes or channels close down in the future, how should we mitigate that risk? How should we prepare ourselves to deal with that type of situation when it does arise? So it puts you in a much better position in the future when the uncertainty does occur.
Yeah. And now moving into the future, looking into the future, seeing what's happening in Ukraine and all the third party effects, is that, you know, there will be shifts in demand, there will be shifts in the supply. So we have to consider that things will change in the near future as we're moving forward. We're moving into the future of what's happening in business and supply chains.
Yeah. Not just the changing demand and supply, of course, but the ripple impacts that it has is, you know, you have an inability to satisfy your customers and your service levels. Of course, your end-to-end costs significantly increase. As we saw in Brexit, there's a lack of skilled labor. And of course, nowadays, sustainability is a key metric as well, that you struggle to reach those metrics if you are stuck trying to fight disruptions that are occurring.
Yeah, maybe we can discuss a bit more about how to prepare for these disruptions within companies on certain levels.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point as well. And you know, if we take one disruption as an example, the COVID-19 disruption, what this slide in front of you tries to bring to life is the way in which the mindset has changed over time. So before, it was mainly about saving cost, being just in time, trying to save every penny from the dollar. And at that stage, you can see the typical viewpoints of the different members of the business as well. You know, where the supply chain director was more curious about fine-tuning, the CEO with the attitude of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So things were kind of steadily progressing as is, without much concern or worry about what might happen in the future. At this stage, ideally, you already want to be running scenarios and evaluating the impact of disruptions. Now, if we go to the second bucket here of during, one day the disruption did occur. Of course, this was a gradual change for COVID-19, but you know, the impact was almost felt immediately for many businesses. And all of a sudden, you started having shortages of everything, and the business went into the firefighting type of mode. So scenarios are, of course, also incredibly valuable here. Sort of operational scenarios where you can quickly evaluate, okay, this part of my business has changed. However, you can only begin to run those scenarios if you have created essentially a strategic digital twin of your network. So as long as you have your network or your supply chain reflected digitally, you have the ability to tweak and play with certain parameters within that network and immediately see the impact or implications it has throughout your network. So, you know, for instance, if your demand suddenly explodes, how should your second tier of suppliers be engaged and be proactively ready for that change to have occurred? And now if we go to the final part, the after part, we have seen this change in mindset take place already, where the focus has now turned to resilience. How do we balance cost and risk and sustainability and so on? and prepare ourselves for the future using these strategic digital twins.
Yeah. Now, and there's a question also from the audience, and I have an opinion about that. We've seen the clarion call for resilience after every downturn, but an initiative eventually always die on the altar of cost efficiency. Why is this time different? But before you answer, we thought at the beginning of this year, COVID is behind us. We are moving in a new era, and then the Ukraine war happened, and I think it's a final wake up call. First, COVID won't go away, and second, the disruptions will be even bigger, and the uncertainty will be bigger. So that's my take on why this time is different. What's your take on that, Anna?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with you. It's in fact, I don't think it's a matter of either or. It's not really just about saving cost. Of course, that's a key priority for any business. And although there should be tremendous focus on sustainability, if we try to only focus on that, there are negative impacts on the bottom line. So really what scenarios should help you do is study the trade-offs between your cost and your sustainability metrics. For instance, if your key goal is to drive down carbon emissions, perhaps there are certain targets that you want to reach. So the idea becomes, what is the trade-off of cost if we try to reach that minimizing of carbon emissions? At the same time, you might have financial targets of not exceeding a certain cost. So the question you might ask is, what is the minimum carbon emission we should have in order not to exceed this cost target that has been set by the business? So I think both these things go hand in hand, and trade-offs need to be deeply studied through scenarios.
Yeah, and we see so many disruptions and so many ripple effects we couldn't have expected before all this. So that's the reason why it won't go away, and we don't go back to normal. Looking at this overview of these levels, also other business functions like the financials and the commercial. What I see in the market when I talk to supply chain directors and executives, more and more board of directors are looking to the supply chain business function directors and executives, because that's where it's all at. It's all coming together in the supply chain, and also from commercial perspective, financial perspective, even with IT, with cyber attacks. So that's being at the heart of all the matters, I think.
Yeah, maybe can I jump in there, Martin? Because I think
yes.
it's an interesting question, right? So why is this time different than the other time? So we see it with our customers as well. So the kind of work that they're doing with AIMMS. So we've seen customers make investment decisions to reshore back to the US. As a resilience measure. We've seen customers in Europe actually building capacity in Asia Pacific in the opposite direction to protect their customers in Asia Pacific. We've seen companies like Intel making massive investments in production capability in Europe and the US, also in the name of resilience and security. And we're seeing even the president of the US talking about it, right? So I think we're seeing it happening. We see a change happening in our customers, and we also see the conversation moving into the boardroom instead of the supply chain director's office.
Yeah. All right. Anand, talking about disruption and how to manage this, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah. So I think the primary takeaway from our previous discussion is that you have to proactively think about disruptions right now and run multiple scenarios and evaluate multiple futures. For example, let's say you have a manufacturing facility in a hurricane-prone location. What you want to do is simulate that factory to close and see what impact it might have. That will in turn then tell you how you should be prepared. So that's what the first bucket is about. It's about being proactive and anticipating disruptions. And how do you do that? You model your supply chain footprint. You model multiple what-if scenarios and try to get a very in-depth view of how you can mitigate risk that could affect your business, and study the rippling effects, as we have discussed, on your entire supply chain. Now, that is on sort of the strategic level in order to be reactively, you must be running scenarios and see how your business should react when a disruption does in fact occur. Hopefully you have already put yourself in the best position by this time, but running scenarios would help you understand which locations to close, whether you should need offshore. There's really hundreds of different options that you have as a business when a disruption occurs. And running these types of scenarios typically tells you which combination of options you should select in order to reach the optimization function that you're trying to achieve, whether that's maximizing your profit, reducing emissions, minimizing costs, whatever that might be.
Yeah, and looking at this model, you have all kind of capacities, warehouses and factories. It's also up to the company itself, what to model. If you are modeling also the capacity of your contract manufacturer, your tier one suppliers, or your distributors, so that how far should you go in modeling all these capacities in your supply chain footprint?
Yeah. I think that's a very, very good question, Martin, because the tendency typically becomes to want to put every single piece of information into whatever software you might be in. And there is a balance between how much data you should ingest while also not sacrificing the actual output that you're trying to achieve. So if we think about network design as a potential solution of scenario modeling, things like DC capacities and production capacities, those are important constraints that do have an impact on how your network should be behaving. However, it's not necessarily a must-have. So you could potentially run scenarios where you kind of relax your capacity constraints and allow the application to go over the limitations you might have. And that in itself generates very important insights, because you start understanding the strategic importance of different locations and different warehouses you might have. So for the future, it helps you prepare as well. So I think the overall point I'm trying to make is that data is important, and it's a discussion that must be had before to understand the level or detail of data in which you should go in order to run the most meaningful scenario.
Yeah, maybe Paul, maybe you can elaborate a bit more about the level of scenario planning and how to apply it.
So this tries to get us to a little bit more to the how. And if you talk about the levels, so we in this slide, the way we carve it up is across the top, you've got the different elements of supply chain. So from left to right, you've got production, storage, and transport. And down the side, you've got the layers of planning. So at the top, strategic, tactical, and operational. Now, scenario planning can happen at any of those levels. With the network design technology that we offer, people are typically at the top two levels, strategic and tactical. And it's important to maybe also talk a little bit about how those two things are starting to blend a little bit. So strategic used to be, all right, I need to open a new DC. Where does that need to be? And that's not something you do every month. But on the tactical level, if you think about your DC, if something goes wrong and one DC goes down, you might be able to adjust your inventory at another DC and service customers out of there. So I guess what I'm saying is there's tactical things you can do in your supply chain without massive capex investments that help you manage the disruption. So we see more and more the concept of strategic and tactical scenario planning starting to blend. So if you look at there's just an example in each of those boxes, but what's interesting for me as well is that in traditional network design that people used to do once every 2 or 5 years, those were the things they were doing, right? So looking at optimal sourcing, looking at facilities, looking at flow optimization. But with the disruptions that you see happening at the moment, those things become very topical. So the DC example is a good one, right? If one goes down, you can shift volumes to another. If a supplier gets disrupted, you can look at alternative suppliers and see what you can get out of other suppliers in the short term. Flow optimization and mode. So you might not invest in a new rail link every month, but you can change modes of transport from road to rail, for example, in the short term to help you cater for disruptions. So it's just trying to give you a sense with this slide of what the scope is for how people are making scenario modeling a reality in their business.
Yeah, and 10, 20 years ago, it was more like a static use of network design. Okay, where should put our DCs and the weights and then the markets. But now it's changing so rapidly that you have to move quickly, and you have also the tooling to have more mathematical simulations needed. And then we talk about digital twins on a warehouse level or on your own network or an extended ecosystem, so that it can be applied on all kind of levels. Maybe
Yeah.
my question here is, you see all kind of boxes. On which level did you mostly start all this?
So it's a good question, and you can start anywhere. And I guess the main driver of the where you start is to where's your biggest pain at the moment. So if you're looking at very detailed stuff around scheduling or things on your warehouse shelves in terms of slotting, or problems with daily deliveries because you've got truck drivers on strike, you might want to focus on the operational area first. But what we see more and more is people starting at the strategic level, and I think it's actually because it's easier to start there. Because if you look at those little arrows on the left, and we spoke about it a bit before, at the strategic level, you don't need to be that granular and that accurate, because you get the high level strategic insights. So you can actually afford to take some shortcuts, which makes it easier to do. So we see a lot of companies starting out at the strategic level, and certainly what we're seeing from a customer pool at the moment at AIMMS is people starting at the strategic/tactical level.
All right. We have a short demo to show, and I would like to move over to the demo, and that will explains a lot, and that will also open up some questions on my side. And afterwards, we have 2 business cases to discuss. So my suggestion is that we just look at a short demo right now.
AIMMS Network Design is an application that you can use to model your supply chain network at strategic and tactical level, and then run various scenarios against it to try to understand how to deal with an uncertain future. How does that work in a typical day of a network analyst? You start by modeling your current supply chain and bringing that in as a reference case so that you have a starting point. Then you can run scenarios against it. In the control panel, you can set certain parameters for your optimization and relax certain constraints. For example, keep DCs open or force them to close, and adjust key cost and capacity parameters for your model. You may also want to adjust your demand using the filters on the screen. You can interact with your demand data to project a future that you expect. And then, once you've set up your scenario, you run it by hitting the Optimize button. That passes everything through the Cplex solver, which then solves that puzzle on the cloud and brings back results that you can look at in the browser. You have got the ability to load up different scenarios and look at them side by side, compare the key metrics for those 2 scenarios, and look at the cost difference between them. There's also the option to slice and dice your data using the filters on the right if you only want to see certain product flows, etc. Using AIMMS Network Design, you can dive deeper into the results of these scenarios to look at the various results options you've got. With the supplier report, you can start understanding what you're going to make and where. With the DC report, you can see which DCs you're going to be using and which ones you shouldn't use, and which ones have capacity constraints in red. If you then want to start understanding what the scenario means for your customers in terms of service levels, you have your drive time distribution right there, and you can always filter the views in these reports to see exactly what you want to see. Then you have the cost to serve report, where you can assess high-level costs in a much greater level of detail. For example, if I click on the map for billings, it will update the bar chart and tell me what the cost to serve is for each product that I'm delivering to billings. I can see the cost build-up per cost type, and also toggle between cost per unit and total cost for all units. If I want to see the drill down tables, I can click on the chart to get the detail for that. So this is what it's like to run scenarios with AIMMS using the Cplex solver in the back end. AIMMS also makes it very easy to visualize using the reports in the browser. Of course, once you've run all these scenarios, you can save them to the database and compare them side by side. So, for example, you can present these results to your internal and external clients to help them make some decisions about what they need to do to meet this future and what they expect in terms of cost and service level impact.
All right. My question would be first, Anand, how long does it take to start to build a model like this?
Yeah, so typically building a model like this could be an endeavor of a few weeks to a few months, depending on the type of detail at which you want to create the model. Typically what we find is the best route is you start off with a simple model that reflects your network, but not with all of the complexities in the beginning. And getting there is a matter of just a few weeks, in fact. Then over time, as you get more data and as you get more accurate data, you ingest it into the model and start refining and enhancing your network, which is a process that could take a month or two at times as well.
Right. Maybe it's time to look at some customer cases. First, we have an American company, an American manufacturing company called La-Z-Boy. And then, can you explain the business case?
Yeah, of course, Martijn. So La-Z-Boy is one of our clients who use the same application that you were seeing previously. They are one of the leading furniture manufacturers in the US, over 94 years in the market. And one of the key challenges they faced is that there was a huge increase in demand for their products due to the pandemic. You can imagine most people started working from home, and there was an extra need to be comfortable while you work from home. So all of the recliners, sofa, chairs, their demand just significantly increased. But the risk became that due to the fact that furniture sales times are very long and the products in question are quite expensive as well, customers don't want to wait very long either, there was a huge challenge in not being able to meet their service levels. So this brought to life certain business questions that La-Z-Boy wanted to address. Things like, do we have enough production capacity to meet this change in demand? Do we need to build capacity? If so, where should we do it? How do we keep our lead time stable? How do we ramp up capacity over time? How do we think about which suppliers and which in-out movements to utilize during this capacity expansion process that we're going through?
All right. Yep. And maybe you can talk a bit more about the challenges and how to address all these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are very clear solutions, luckily, to challenges like these. So what La-Z-Boy did is, firstly, they created their model in network design, which means ingesting all of the relevant data at the right level of aggregation in order to answer these strategic questions of open close and strategically moving their flows. The first step of this process is always to model a detailed baseline, so a current state of your business. And the value of this is, firstly, you're able to validate. Once you create the model, you get certain costs out of the model, and you're able to validate whether these match your historical costs and your historical flows. And this in turn gives you that confidence you need once you hit the optimize button to see you are optimizing from a state of reality. And then you can also compare how much savings you're actually making compared to where you are now. The second step then becomes to think about multiple what-if scenarios. For La-Z-Boy, the scenarios were mainly around increasing demands of different regions, speaking with their demand forecasting stakeholders and understanding what the future could look like and simulating that in the app. And then overall, to find an optimal footprint of your network that meets those capacity requirements.
Yeah.
And of course, eventually, so I think this was a couple-month-long process, after which the business was able to find exactly the locations in which they want to maximize the capacity, which production facility especially. They understood where to procure their products, so not only the cheapest alternatives, but also the most resilient alternatives. And it didn't just stop there. So once they had this setup of network design, they were able to think outside of their initial questions as well. So they were able to run their new ideas, new uncertainties through the application, as it's always present now, and study the impacts that they might have as well. And eventually, we are talking about tens of millions of cost savings that La-Z-Boy was able to find within just a few months of structuring their network and running scenarios.
You have made an interesting point. Also, based on this kind of scenarios, you have different behavior needed. So procurement may have to look differently at the market, where to buy material and where to look for capacity. So it also open up the views on the world in a different way, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It has a lot to do with visibility as well. So not only do you get that personal visibility if you are the modeler running these scenarios, but you are able to engage a lot more with your stakeholders and ask them the relevant questions as well, and also open their eyes to the situation that is at play at the moment and the impact that their business, or their roles might also have in the coming future.
All right. I have a question coming up from the audience, and it's also my question. So, who are your users or persona? Is it just one main person, or different ones across different departments? And relating to La-Z-Boy, who was the main user at La-Z-Boy?
Yeah, that's another very interesting question. So, really, it's about the knowledge that you put behind these tools. So one thing you need is someone with the expertise on the data side. So someone that knows where to find the data, how to manipulate the data in the relevant format that you can feed into the applications, and how to manage and maintain that data on an ongoing basis. So that's one hand, but that is not enough. At the same time, you need the knowledge, sort of the business leadership knowledge. You need the insights of, in real life, what is actually going on in the business. If you run a scenario, how reasonable is that in practice? So once you have those two mindsets combined, that's when you can generate the most power of this tool. If we think about La-Z-Boy, the interesting story here is that it was just one person who was able to find all of these savings, because they managed to have both the data and the business insight. They had worked their way through the business for a long, long time. Typically, what we see is you could also have 2 or 3 people who combine in their day-to-day roles to run these types of scenarios, where one person manages the data, other person manages the scenario running. Or you could also have vast global supply chains with different regions focusing on different parts of this digital twin or network design that you're studying.
All right, makes sense. Paul, maybe you can tell us a bit more about another business case of Intel.
Yeah, sure. Sure, Martin. So Intel, I think, I'm assuming everybody knows who Intel is, the largest semiconductor chip manufacturer. Been around for a long time. And they were facing a couple of challenges. One, I guess, is it's not really written there, but they didn't have this ability to run the scenarios of a digital twin, and they needed to establish that. They were advised by advisors that they needed to get better at that. So if you look at what their typical business questions are, they're quite different actually. So we all know about the global chip shortage, and that partially triggered the need to in-house the network design capability, and that triggered them to set up this center of excellence to support the business doing that. So part of solving the problem of the global chip shortages is trying to understand end-to-end throughput time. So it's a very complex supply chain. It's global. It's got customers around the world and a lot of capacity focused in Asia Pacific. But it's a multi-step process to produce one of these chips. It's not quite as simple as it looks. So you've got end-to-end throughput times in the weeks to the months, and if you can reduce those end-to-end throughput times, you can start releasing some of the bottlenecks that are in the system. So we work very closely with them actually to help develop the functionality to help them do that, and they're actively working with that and running scenarios to see where they can take big chunks of throughput time out of their end-to-end processes. So that's maybe on a longer term vision. In the shorter term, once they establish this digital twin of their supply chain, things started happening. So the Shanghai DC is very topical at the moment. So with the lockdown in Shanghai, it impacted their DC there. So what they were able to do then, and actually do that in session, is to say, okay, well, let's run some scenarios around that and see what happens if we force close this DC. What are the alternatives? Where does it move product to? What's the impact on throughput times? What's the impact on cost and service level? And that actually also triggered them to say, well, actually, with this kind of scenario analysis capability, we should really be using this to support our business continuity planning. So not only reacting when a DC closed down, but let's start identifying some key risk areas in our supply chain, and then run the scenarios around that to see if something does happen with one of those risk locations or transport routes, what's plan B? How do we do that? So that's an example of moving, from reactive, okay, DC closed down, what do I do, to proactive, to say, well, let's look at the key risk areas and start running those scenarios already.
All right. And if you move into the future, what are their plans how to use it?
Yeah, so I think the immediate plan is around the business continuity planning. So that's something that they're working on actively at the moment. Mm-hmm. And then I think long term is in terms of changing the supply chain network to improve the end-to-end throughput times. So and that's not that easy to execute, right? So it's easy to simulate and model in a scenario, but to execute that takes a bit of time. So I think that will be keeping them busy in the future. And also worth mentioning that they're also very interested in the sustainability modeling. So they also do a lot of work around sustainability, and we're actually doing a joint project with them to start introducing carbon emission factors into their model, so that they can start evaluating those trade-offs: cost, service level, end-to-end throughput time, carbon emissions.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see also here on the slide, that they are working on a digital twin on a supply chain level, on a strategic level. But I can imagine that they want to have capacities of their tier one suppliers, even the ASML of this world, also being a big part of the whole ecosystem, that they expand the digital twin footprint, I would say, or extend the whole ecosystem they are going to use in this digital twin.
Yeah, it's a very good point actually. So they also started with at a point where they modeled the forward supply chain, and didn't go too far back, just to get their first model done. But subsequent to that, they're now expanding that. So it's another good example of what we spoke about earlier. You don't have to model the entire world and solve all the world's problems in one step. You can start smallish and then grow from there. So that's also the philosophy that they're taking.
So at the end, what are you seeing as possible applications and outcomes?
Well, I can't go into the details, unfortunately. So
no.
But I think on a high level, it's the outcomes we're seeing is got the technology, able to work with it, and able to react to disruptions, and able to think strategically about the future and make changes in the network to reach their objectives.
Yeah, right. And on maybe we are ending it. We're nearing the end of the webinar, and we'll have some time for questions. But maybe you can summarize the key benefits of scenario modeling and planning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key benefits is around visibility. So it's seeing and understanding the details of your end-to-end supply chain. And what that leads to is the ability to generate good decisions to complex problems. As Paul explained in the beginning, there's a lot of focus on prescriptive analytics, and that's really about not just looking at the number that optimization generates, but also prescribing a detailed solution or next step to what those numbers actually mean. The third benefit is around massive ROIs. So investment in technologies like our application or like scenario modeling technologies is usually in the tens of thousands, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands, but the benefit or savings that we see are typically in the millions. So there is a huge return of investment in these technologies. And also at the same time, you need to think about the impact of not doing scenario modeling, which typically with disruptions results in a loss. So it's really about equipping yourself with the right tools so you can react quickly. The fourth point is around peace of mind, which I personally think is an underrated point about scenario planning. Most of the discussions that we have with customers, we typically hear back the sigh of relief that they have because now they have the visibility, they have the ability to run these scenarios, and they have this open relation with the customers because there is visibility in the network that you have created. And of course, finally, competitive advantage. You could imagine if you are equipped with the right tools and your competitors are not, then inherently you are putting yourself one step forward as compared to your competition.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies might say you need to raise your inventories and that kind of stuff as a matter of resiliency. But basically, if you have this kind of insight, the capacities in your network, so you can have have a reservation on capacity and commitments. So that there's a different kind of ball game you are able to play if you have this kind of visibility of your network and the capacities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of decisions are still made from gut feel or some basic Excel models. And although oftentimes gut feel does a good job, what you want is to back up that gut feel with some hard numbers and some real scenario running. So it's typically a combination of the two is where you want to get to.
Yeah, and what I also see related to the first point you're making here, because companies are required to look into sustainability and move into scope 3 sustainability metrics. So beyond your own capacities, they have to look into the supply chain of the tier 1, tier 2. So that's the scope 3 region. So because companies are being forced to move in that direction to become more sustainable on the scope 3 level, they have to have some visibility on their network and also where to start and where to improve in your network on that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And sustainability extends far more than simply carbon emissions. And as you rightly said, it's also deeply rooted with responsible business, right? So the more visibility you have to those second, third, fourth tier suppliers that you might have, the more informed decisions you can make as well.
Yeah, and I also think with this kind of modeling, it gets easier to get a root cause analysis with all kind of complexity in your network.
Right.
And so you can drill down, okay, what's causing all this, and then how should we deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you really want is a tool that allows or enables that to be done in an easy, intuitive fashion. So a lot of focus must be put on the actual interface that you're working on so that you can easily dive into the detail that you want to and take out the complexities that are not really that relevant to you.
Yeah. And now when we see now the shifts in supply and demands more extensively, the bandwidth of this shifts between 5 or 25%, you get certain threshold, and then you have to move into other kind of decision making. Whereas before COVID, we have also minor bandwidth of changes, and now with the huge changes in transport costs, tariffs, you name it, inflation. So we have a need to have a better feeling about bandwidth and all kind of levers we are able to relate upon.
Right. Yeah. That the increased variability that you're talking about creates, as you know, a much bigger need now to come up with those best case, worst case, and most likely case scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's another key benefit of the ability to run multiple scenarios, Martin. So you're not just saying, well, I think it's going to be 15%, and that's the only scenario I can. You've got the ability to say, well, I think it might be 10%. Let's run a scenario. It might be 15. Let's run a scenario. It might be 20. Let's run that scenario, and then you can look at the results of those three scenarios and come up with a solution that works for all three of them.
Yeah.
Rather than just hedging all your bets on one future, because the future is uncertain by definition.
Yeah, and you get a better feeling about the robustness of your plans.
Exactly.
Maybe to wrap up, why AIMMS, and then we are opening up for some questions.
Yeah, so I think this slide also tries to summarize really the values of scenario modeling and how AIMMS brings those to life. So I already focused on the easy part. It's one word, but really what this means is there's a lot of focus that goes into the UI, into the workflow, creating understandable and relevant visualizations that really bring the supply chain to life. Key benefit of using AIMMS is that the results are typically instant. If they are very big and complex models, you are still able to get results extremely quickly by using some certain settings. Deployment is typically a concern that that buyers have. Everything is cloud-based in the AIMMS technology, which means you are typically set up and ready to go within a day or two. And then the learning process, due to the easy nature, is also just a matter of hours and weeks rather than months and months of training. AIMMS is also a leader in, it's in our heritage optimization. We've been doing it for 30 plus years, and scenario modeling as well is layered on top, something that we have been market leaders at for a long time. And finally, affordable pricing. I think that's a key benefit of going for AIMMS as well.
All right. Thanks for this. I would like to open up for some questions. So feel free to ask questions to the audience. My question from my side, it seems very intuitive, but I also read somewhere you have a community of users. How do these users communicate, and what do they learn from each other? Paul or Anand?
Yeah, it's a good one. So the online community is there to encourage users from different businesses to talk to each other and share their experiences. So certainly, there's certainly value to be had from hearing about the experiences of other people and how they're doing it. As Anand said, the groups are often quite small within the companies, so that knowledge sharing. So that's the idea of the online community. So we see lots of interactions there. And with also maybe mentioning that we plan a user meetup every year where users from different companies can share their stories and interact and collaborate with each other, just to spark ideas and compare notes and so on.
So I can
Sorry, maybe just to build on that very quickly, Martijn. Another value of having this community is that from a product perspective, you're able to get a lot of valuable information. Of course, the functionalities that are developed in our products are based on satisfying our customers' need and really what the market is expecting. So having a community that's willing to share their needs and their expectations from technology also helps us create a product that is constantly fit for need to what the market is looking for.
There was also a question about the use of shadow carbon pricing. Paul, can you relate to that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not sure. I did try and type in an answer, but I'm not sure also what's exactly meant by shadow carbon pricing. But with the AIMMS technology, the way it works with the multi-objectives, you can specify cost, minimize cost as an objective, but you can also create custom objectives. And carbon emissions would be an example that where you measure carbon emissions in tons. And you can do one of two things. You can turn the carbon tons into a dollar or euro value using a carbon price. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is you need to make some assumption on that. It could be anywhere between 30 euros and 200 euros, depending on who you talk to. Mm-hmm. But that's one way of doing it. But what you can also do, and this was feedback also from our customers saying, don't give us functionality to just minimize carbon because you'll put us out of business. We need to be able to run optimizations that say minimize the carbon in my network, but subject to maybe a 2% increase in cost or 5% increase in cost. And what we see is those trade-offs work very nicely with. So that's true multi-objective modeling, where you've got different units of measures in your objective function. And that works pretty nicely. So you can start finding solutions that give you a big hit on carbon, but a relatively small increase in cost. Because ultimately, it's a trade-off. Ultimately, there's a trade-off to be made.
All right, thanks. I have some more questions from my side and possibly also from the audience, but we're running out of time. So with this, I would like to invite people right after this, if they want to discuss this subject a bit more. We'll be available in the lounge. So the next 30 minutes we are available in the lounge. So click on table 1 and click on a chair, and we'll have a chat in the next 30 minutes. So I invite you to do that. Next, we have developed a checklist together with AIMMS about network design tooling that's available on our website, so you can go there. There's also more information about the AIMMS community, what to exchange and what to learn from other users. And I also have here the contact details of Anand and Paul. So with this, I would like to thank Anand and Paul for joining me. So thanks.
Thank you, Martijn. Thanks, everyone.
And Anand, I'll thank you for your expertise.
Thanks, Martijn. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
And for all the listeners, thank you for joining, and thank you for asking the questions. And hopefully we will see you in another event, another webinar in the next weeks. If not, maybe you will join us in the lounge, and I will see you at another time. And with this, I'd like to wrap up, and I will move over to the lounge. And thank you, and bye-bye.